Yes, it's time for Emerging Issues, episode number 2 for 2025. So this one is actually coming out on YouTube and in the podcast format B, which is going to be very, very interesting. But our topic this week is looping Vegas players. Now, we've spoken about it on the Back to Basics series around how to set up your round one team to take advantage of looping, because we've got all these guys that we can switch in and out because they are limited trades, and because the Titans are on the bye this year, it's really interesting stuff.
Exactly right, and especially that now that the trials are done, there's actually a few options for the Titans that you want to probably heavily consider to put into your team, which A, benefits your team for the long run, but B, gives you this opportunity to loop to begin with.
Yeah, it does. And the reason why it's so easy to do it this week is that you've got full control in the amount of green dots you have. You've got unlimited trades. So if you follow our strategies in that Back to Basics video and your C and VC strategy and lining up your starting 13 in order of playing, you'll have the ability to actually have a look at some of these loops. But let's get into the four main candidates we've got here. So for those on YouTube, you can see Jaden Campbell, Keanu Kinney, AJ Brimson, and Bo Fermor are there on the screen. Four assets B that are very, very interesting, obviously. Outside backs, bit trickier this year, especially the winger fullback.
Yeah, you nailed it on the head there with the wing fullbacks, and this is where I think it's going to be the best for looping this particular year because, as I've said in previous podcasts, I think this is the hardest spot to fill where there's not many mid-rangers that you can kind of count on, but there is some guns who are coming through that you can see on that screen.
Yes, so they are guys that we are very, very interested in. We're going to talk about them, of course, plenty in the pre-season, but let's start with actually setting our team up and opening for business. So you'll be able to see on the YouTube, so for the benefit of those who are listening to this on the podcast, we've got Savelio Tamale and Jesse McLean on our bench. Now, obviously the normal bench loop, we would just put the first guy we want to loop at 5 and then the other guys 6, 7, 8. But because we're looking to use the winger fullback starting slot, it makes sense to put Tamale at 7. So if Tamale doesn't go that good, we can put McLean above him. But if Tamale goes pretty good, well, we can just leave McLean underneath him.
Exactly right. It also gives you a chance to actually, sorry, no, it doesn't give you a chance to double loop. I'm having a bit of a brain fart there. But no, exactly right. And you can see on the graphic as well, because Tamale doesn't have the wing fullback tag just yet, but we're going to presume that he is going to get that come round 1. So this is the perfect loop setup.
Yes. So for the benefit of those that are listening to this on the podcast, the outside back eligible players in this side are Jack Bird, Robert Toya, and Ruben Garrick, who of course got centre eligibility, as well as Kidione Katoga on the bench. Savelio Tamale, Jesse McLean, Jules on the bench, and then we've got Jaden Campbell and Ayongi in there. So essentially how this loop is set up is that if we see Tamale go really good, say he gets a 45, what's going to happen is Jaden Campbell is a starting winger fullback, and when we get to that last game of the round, we'll see Tamale score effectively come in and replace Campbell. Now, the other thing with the starting slot loop is that we need to make sure that Tamale is the highest ranked winger fullback on our bench. Because if we put, say, Ruben Garrick on the bench and Ruben Garrick plays, then potentially we may not actually get Tamale as our loopable player.
So exactly right. That's where my brain fart just happened because I thought you had Ruben Garrick in the centres. So I was going to be saying we could do a potential double loop there. But exactly right. So that also goes for your interchanges as well. So not just on the emergencies. You need to make sure that there is no other winger fullback that is above Tamale in order for you to get his score in this particular scenario.
Yes, so we've got 45 here. So in this scenario, you can see on the screen here, Tamale's going to come in and backfill Jane Campbell. Campbell scores 45 on a bye and he has 2 byes. Happy days. Our next option potentially is where both McLean and Tamale go really good. And again, we're making the assumption Jesse McLean's going to start here. He may not, so this may prove irrelevant. But if they both score well, say 45 plus, what we can actually do is we can get a second Titans winger fullback in. So that could be Keeney or it could be Brimson. I think you'd probably maybe just go for Brimson and one of the more expensive ones. And again, as we can see here, Tamale and McLean, the only 2 winger fullbacks on the bench. So when Jane Campbell and AJ Brimson are in our starting winger fullback, we actually get both of those scores.
Yeah, and it's absolutely perfect there. And again, you're also getting Titans players who are going to be assets throughout the entire year. Plus, you're going to have these scores that you're going to be very, very happy with. What would you say the magic number for a wing fullback would be for you to want to loop in this particular scenario?
It's a really good question because I think it really depends on the player that you're looking to loop, right? So for you using Jane Campbell, who's a player I'm very big on, my threshold for probably looping that player in might potentially be lower because I'm inclined to take Jane Campbell anyway. Maybe if someone for AJ Brimson, who I'm personally on the fence about, I might want to see a 4 at the front of that score, so like a 40 plus. Now, for you, B, that might be different. Like if you think Brimson's a bit more of a better fantasy prospect in terms of value than Campbell, that threshold might be different.
Well, exactly right. But in this particular scenario, is what I'm saying is that I think that something with a 4 in front of it is what you're going to want to loop with. So if Tamale scores, let's say, a 35, again, it's an outside back, so they're not the highest scoring players out there. If he scores a 35, do you risk moving McLean up to loop him there? So that's just, and you got to kind of have a number in your head that you're going to want to have for Tamale to score to take that.
Yes, and that's the key thing because, like you said, once these two guys score, you have to make the decision that you take Tamale if he stays at 7 and McLean at 8, or if Tamale doesn't score that well, then potentially you can flip it the other way. So the second chance loop is there as well, so we can see if Tamale scores at 25, we can move McLean up to 6. So again, we can then have a look at those. And say Tamale did score 35 and you put McLean above, which I think would be a bold choice. If they both scored well, you could take them. And I guess the other option there as well is if, say, Tamale scored a 35, you left him there, McLean goes massive, gets a hat trick, and scores 65, well, then you're probably going to just loop both those guys and take 100 points from two cheap winger fullbacks.
Yeah, exactly right. But yeah, and especially with this scenario as well, you're going to have to be very on top of the Vegas games. Again, that's presuming that it's McLean who you're doing this double loop with, because he plays straight after Tamale. You don't have the week to think about it.
Yes, so it's 10 a.m. Queensland time for the first match, and then I believe the second match, the NRL, I believe starts at 3 p.m. So you'll have like a few hours, but if you're having a nice barbecue to celebrate the start of the NRL season with some mates, just make sure you get to your phone for a moment and just check where you want to leave McLean. So, yep, that's the other scenario that you've got there as well. Now, I want to talk just briefly about centres, B, because we did mention that Fermor is an option. Now, I'm not that keen on it. Now, the reason for that is you can see with this team that we've got here. So, for the benefit of those that are listening at home, we've got Fermor sitting in the starting centres for this starting slot loop. We've got Toya starting centre, wing fullbacks, Ruben Garrick, who's got that centre duel, Isaiah Yongi, Sione Finau there. But on our bench, we've got Tamale at 7, McLean at 8, and then Kidiona Katoga at 6. Now, the risk with Katoga, of course, is that he plays in the last game, as we saw this week. He actually got scratched in the 24-hour team list. So that happens in round 1, you're snookered, or if he gets moved to the bench or something like that. So based on the amount of cheap centres available, we're probably not actually going to try and do a starting slot loop with the centre position. We'll probably just leave it to the winger fullbacks.
Yeah, I think it's then overcomplicating it as well, and especially when you've got a guy like, you got Beau Fermor there, but you've also got a Dylan Lucas who can kind of slot into that spot as well, and he plays that week, like for like. So again, it's depending on if you're willing to have that player throughout the entire year. And for me, again, there's so many centres out there. I don't think Beau Fermor is going to be on the radar.
No, yeah, grab him in draft for sure. Just swallow that round 1 bye, but yeah, not so much in classics. So, of course, as well, it goes without saying, if you just want to do that basic bench loop, just put your Jaden Campbell, your AJ Brimson, or your David Feet, or whoever it is from the Titans at 4, and then you can just then rotate between 5 and 6. So say put Sam Smith at 5, and maybe another cheapie like we can't really do Jack Kajewski because it's the same game, but potentially Tyron Munro, for example. Not sure many people have them in his team, but you'll be able to flick them around as well. But I mean, the key takeaways from this is that obviously, you mentioned it there before, you need to research these Titans players. There's no point just taking them for a nice loop score in round 1. You actually have to be sold on them being a long-term fantasy prospect.
Yeah, exactly right. So there's guys like, Jojo Fafita, who's a dual position player. I think he scored 100 in a game last year, or 90 or something like that. So people might be like, oh, look at his average. It's 37. It's going to be good. But it's boosted by like an outlier score. So he's not a guy that you'd want to consider to have throughout the entire year. I think you've nailed it with the 4 that you've chosen in those outside backs. So yeah, just be happy with who you choose. And yeah, make sure you do the research on them.
Yep, that's right. If you're happy with them as a long-term fantasy prospect, go for it with the loops. Key thing with that as well is place your loopable players in the right spots. Make sure you bench depth. So if you've got lots of winger fullbacks in your team, make sure you try and get them into your starting side if you're doing that starting slot loop. And try not overcomplicate it. Look, if it lines up perfectly to take 2 loopable scores and you take Brimson and Campbell, fantastic. If not, just keep it nice and simple. Keep it within your level of knowledge and just go from there. So, of course, any questions around that, we can probably cover them off in the Thursday Q&A or as well in the socials. You can get in touch with us there and we can see what we can do. But of course, it's just key with these players that, if you want to give Tamale a couple of cracks, whack him at 6 or 7. Don't put him at 8 or 5. But that's this week's emerging issues.